Hello, welcome. My name is Claudine Metrick. I am an associate professor of 2D foundations at Pratt MWP, and I want to thank you for joining me today for this discussion of some of my work. I want to start by thanking the curators for celebrating suffrage, Mary Murray, curator of modern and contemporary art, and Miranda Holfelt, curator of 19th century American art. Thank you both for including my work in this lovely exhibition. It's been an honor to show alongside some of my heroes in the collection. And I want to thank you for broadening and deepening the discussion, providing a venue for work by women that isn't always given the spotlight. So with that said, I'm joining you today from my home studio. There's some work on the wall in progress. So I thought, because I'm doing this rather than joining you in the museum, I thought it would give me the opportunity to actually show you some images of my work, some images of the series that aren't actually on display at the museum right now. So, and maybe give you a better sense of the series that they come from. So this body of work that I'm showing right now is called A Love Letter to My Garden. And this work actually came from the collision of two events or two circumstances. The first one being my own intense interest in botany and gardening. And the second being the sale of our first home in order to move and to come to Utica. So ladies and gentlemen, I married a botanist. It's my weakness. And because of that, I think I really got to experience the natural world in a very different way that I never had before. I did not grow up in a house where we spent a lot of time outdoors. Like, I had never been camping when I was married, but that soon changed. And the time I spent with my husband out in nature really kind of changed my relationship with it, because he knew the names of the birds that we were encountering or the plants that we saw, or he could explain to me the reasons behind natural phenomena, which up to that point I had maybe observed, but didn't realize that there was a why or a how behind it. And this new information really kind of became fascinating to me, became a passion. And we bought our first house in Massachusetts, and I had this idea that I would be one of those ladies who put on the muck boots and went out on a Saturday afternoon and spent time, I don't know, trimming the zinnias. And so I started to garden. And I searched through and found some of these images of the garden, and I kind of couldn't resist sharing them with you. But this interest in gardening really, dare I say, blossomed. It kind of became something else. It became an interest in native plant species and native ecology, like the animals and ecological structures that those could support. And so what began as tending the bearded irises that were left over from the previous owner quickly grew into putting in tons of echinacea and then watching the goldfinches as they came to eat, or researching a host plant for a swallowtail butterfly and making sure I had plenty of it in the garden. So the prospective move to Utica was both joyful, because there was a new opportunity on the horizon with a new job, but it was also sad, and there was some grief and loss involved with leaving this house, leaving this garden that I had spent 7 years tending. Unless you think this is like a just going out on a Saturday with my gardening shears every once in a while. It was more like putting in 100 to 200 plant starts every summer season and really trying to rehabilitate what had once been a suburban lawn into something that would be more ecologically friendly. So I think in the late spring, like when we knew we were going to move, but before we did so, we actually had a lot of time before we left, I had this urge or this image in my head, and this is often how paintings start for me, like in a dream or if I'm driving, and it's like this fleeting idea, like I knew I wanted to make work that looked like that. It had to have like that dark red violet, it had to feel juicy, it had to be like on a white background. And so I just set about making it, whatever this is. And it's kind of through that process, through the first painting, and then if it's interesting enough, through the second painting, that I really kind of unearth the idea of the work. Like, what is it that I'm trying to say? And I think as I did this, I started to realize, oh, these are flowers. I'm really interested in the materiality of the paint. Like, there are moments in here where I'm literally just taking the scrapings off of my palette. I'm really interested in the marks I can make, the subtractive marks. I'm interested in toying with color. So I have this sort of warm neutral with a very just white, probably straight out of the tube, straight out of the jar white, laid red on top. And then we shift over to a cooler light color on the left-hand side. And through the process of making this painting, this pattern sort of appears. So I'm also thinking about maybe it exists in a real space, but it's a space where perspective might not apply, or where the rules of perspective could be broken. So trying to push an open space and flatten out space and make it feel parallel to the picture plane and patterned. This is one of the paintings that's on view at Munson-Williams. And you can see, I'll show you, and I apologize, when I blew it up this much, it's not great, but I did want to just zoom in and show you some of those palette scrapings. Sometimes I feel like maybe some of the best moments happen on the palette because you're not paying attention or you're not trying to control it. And there are just these times where a color can get accidentally laid against another color, and it's exciting. And I felt the desire to save and keep some of these moments. So I started at times scraping this dried paint up and, you know, mounding it together and adhering it to the canvas. This particular piece is not a native plant. If you guys are gardeners, you're probably calling me out. This is a bearded iris, and it was planted by the previous owner. And to me, it just sort of struck me as like the quintessential plant that my grandmother might have in her garden. They're very stately, they're very ruffled, they're very diaphanous, they're beautiful. And as I worked on this painting, they kind of started to embody a personality for me. Like, they felt like characters, not just shape and color anymore, but that they might have, they might have a personality. And to me, they were those ladies that run around in The Music Man who are really upset that there's going to be a band in town. Like those women in those ruffled blouses and those bustled skirts. And so that's where that name kind of comes from. And it kind of comes from that form of the iris as well, like that terribly cinched in moment in the blossom right here. It feels like that cinched in corseted waist. And then that explosion of shape towards the top and towards the bottom. I think I'm going to show you 3 more pieces. So as I mentioned earlier, it might be that the germ of the idea is being found in the first piece and perhaps further explored in the second piece. But by the third or fourth piece, I most likely have a set of guidelines that I'm operating under. Like, for instance, if a painting is going to be a part of this series, it will have a flower, it will probably have a vase, it will be in some sort of patterned space, and the materiality of the paint will be very important. And I like to work this way because I think it gives me a lot of freedom. By taking a lot of choices off of the table, then I'm really able to proceed to the next painting. I can put that blank canvas on the wall, and the question is not what I will paint, but which flower, how big, where is it going to go, what might the color palette be? And those are simpler choices. They kind of help me sustain and explore the idea. So I don't know, in this particular piece, I was really excited by the highly saturated colors that I kind of grouped together in this upper right-hand corner, and the way that they're contrasted with these more muted or chromatic colors that take up most of the format. It's the first time that I deal with such an intensely projecting plane in this series. And because I did that, I think I also sort of played with perspective even further and tried to create this diminishing pattern on top of that plane. And then this sort of fun little, I think like subconscious nod to the perspective guidelines back here, an arrow kind of pointing us. So I'll just show you my last piece. And this piece is also on display at the museum. When we moved here, we rented a little condo like on the edge of New Hartford, kind of by Chadwick's. And the grounds around the condominium or in the complex were, really maintained. Like they were mowed twice a week and sprayed with chemicals 3 times a year, and nothing grew there. But directly behind this yard was one of the most magnificent prairie meadows I think I had ever seen. It's just not something you see that often in eastern Massachusetts, where if you throw a rock, you hit a house. There's not a lot of undisturbed open land. But here behind our house was just a field in late September that was filled with goldenrod and asters and joe pye weed, and these milkweed had gotten really thick and large, and by late October they had dried and burst open. And they were just a fascinating shape to me. They're so very sculptural, and yet they're filled with this material that almost doesn't exist, that's quite diaphanous. Yeah, so they got brought into the studio with me. I think this piece uses a lot of verticality in the composition, like the vase becomes a vertical line. It's just off vertical, the stripes in the background. And it's kind of countered by this like radiating diagonal arrangement of the milkweed and the diagonality of the shadow. Again, I played with the color. Like I really was interested in kind of making a believable sense of light on this fake wall that I was imagining. So the reds in the stripes change in their saturation and change in their temperature. The green on the wall also changes. There's a sense, here that there isn't light, but here that there is. And then I also really kind of enjoyed flipping what you might expect down here on the table, letting the shadow be this light color, and the table is something I kind of painted on top of this already existing painting down there. I sort of just couldn't resist saving some of that yellow ochre color because it really felt like it glowed. So thank you very much for joining me and for letting me tell you a little bit about my work. I appreciate it. And if you haven't had a chance to make it out to the show yet, I want to invite you to come along. Celebrating Suffrage is on view at Munson-Williams until January 3rd. Thank you.